I still remember that morning like it was a quiet storm breaking inside me. The sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the hall, soft and golden, catching every crystal on the chandelier. But all I could feel was small. I had spent hours preparing for my engagement, brushing my hair, polishing my old shoes, and ironing my worn suit until it almost shone. I told myself it didn't matter what I wore. I told myself Sarah loved me for who I was, not for what I owned. And then she walked in, Sarah, with her flawless hair, her designer dress that shimmered like a promise, and the kind of smile that made people feel both included and judged at once. She looked at me, really looked, and the corner of her lips twitched with something I didn't want to see. "Oh, is that what you're wearing?" she asked softly, almost sweetly, but her eyes betrayed a quiet amusement, a spark of mockery. I forced a smile. I tried to brush it off. Yeah, I thought it would be fine. My voice felt smaller than the suit on my back. Around us, her friends and family laughed lightly, the sound ringing off the tall walls. Her father, Brayden, was talking to someone across the room, his presence commanding without a word. And I felt like I was standing outside the circle of light, invisible, misplaced. I wanted to say something clever, something to prove I was enough, but nothing came out. Only silence, only the hum of the chandelier and the soft, terrible realization that appearances mattered far more to her than I had imagined. Little did I know then, that same suit, the one she had quietly mocked, would later reveal a truth she could never ignore. A truth that would teach her, and maybe even me, that pride can blind people. That the worth of a man is never measured by fabric or price. And in that silence, as I straightened my jacket again, I made a promise to myself. I would not let humiliation define me. Not today. Not ever. I am Henry. I grew up in a small, crowded apartment on the edge of the city, where the winters were harsh and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument from the neighbors. My father worked long hours in construction. My mother cleaned offices late at night. Money was always tight, but love was there, quiet and warm, like the little kitchen light that never went out. Sarah was the opposite of my world. She lived in a house so big it had its own gardens, fountains, and hallways that seemed to go on forever. Her father, Brayden, was a billionaire, a man whose reputation could sway markets and whose word carried weight in rooms I would never dream of entering. And yet, she had chosen me. At least I thought she had. When Sarah and I first met, she seemed different. She laughed at my awkward jokes, asked me about my dreams, and sometimes said things like, "I like that you're real, Henry." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But life has a way of showing cracks, little ones at first, like hairline fractures in glass. Sarah's world was full of silk dresses, lavish parties, and a subtle obsession with appearances. I was just me. The man she smiled at sometimes, the man she introduced proudly, yet always seemed to hesitate before saying my name. Her friends didn't hide it either. They would give me polite smiles and small nods, but there was a distance there. A quiet way of saying, "You don't belong here." I could see it in the way they lingered on her jewelry, on her shoes, on the way she moved through the room. I felt invisible, even when standing next to the woman I loved. Brayden was polite when I first met him. Too polite, in a way that felt like a test I didn't know I was taking. He spoke softly, shaking my hand with a firm grip that left my fingers tingling. I remember thinking how different he was from my own father, not just in wealth, but in presence. Every word, every gesture, carried authority. And I wondered if he could see the nervousness in my eyes. I wanted to impress him, to show him I was worthy of his daughter. But all I had was honesty, determination, and the suit on my back, a hand-me-down that had survived years of wear. And though I straightened my jacket and held my chin high, I felt small. Even preparing for our engagement had been a battle with my own insecurities. I watched Sarah pick her dress, flawless and elegant, while I stared at my reflection in the mirror, counting the wrinkles and faded edges of my suit. I told myself love mattered more than clothing, but deep down, I knew that in her world, appearances mattered too. Despite the differences, I loved her. Truly, I wanted to believe that our worlds could meet somewhere in the middle. I wanted to think she could see beyond the suit, beyond my empty pockets, and love the man I was inside. Yet, there was always a quiet tension, a small, nagging voice that whispered, I might never be enough. And so, as I stood outside her family's grand house that morning, waiting to step into a world that felt both dazzling and cruel, I held on to one thought. I may not have money, but I have integrity. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the silk and gold in the world. The days after the engagement were quiet but not peaceful. I had imagined a time filled with joy, laughter, and warmth. Instead, I found myself walking a narrow line between hope and discomfort. Sarah had this way of smiling at me while her eyes scanned the room, almost as if she were measuring me against an invisible standard. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that love was patient, that she would see me for who I truly was. But the subtle digs began to accumulate, like raindrops on a window pane. The first moment that really hurt was at her family's dinner party. I had arrived early, carefully choosing my words and trying to act confident. But my suit, old, faded, patched in places I hadn't noticed until the light hit it, drew more than a few glances. Sarah's friend Sophia whispered something that I couldn't catch fully, and her lips curved into a small, almost mocking smile. I felt my face grow warm, but I kept my eyes on Sarah, hoping she would defend me. She didn't. "Henry, pass me the wine, please," she said lightly, her voice carrying the kind of sweetness that could melt hearts. And yet, there was a subtle lilt, a pause, that told me she knew exactly how uncomfortable I felt. I tried to laugh it off, to make a joke, but it fell flat. The silence that followed pressed on me like a weight. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel in an obvious way, but it was enough to make me feel small. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern repeated. At social gatherings, I was always conscious of my clothes, my shoes, the tone of my voice. Every laugh seemed to echo in my ears, every glance at me filled with judgment. Sarah's patience was short. She would sigh when I suggested simple, low-cost ideas for our future, like taking walks or cooking at home. She wanted grandeur, perfection, wealth in every detail, and I was just not enough. Even in private, things shifted. Our conversations, once warm and lively, now felt like negotiations. I tried to bring up my fears, my doubts, but she brushed them away with gentle, almost dismissive words. "Henry, you worry too much. Things will work out." And yet, her eyes would flicker with a judgment I could not escape. Her father, Brayden, seemed to notice it all. He never said a word, only observing with that quiet, commanding presence of his. Sometimes I caught him looking at me in my suit, and I wondered what he thought. Was he disappointed in me? Or was he testing me? I could never tell. Evan, my best friend, tried to reassure me. "Henry, don't let it get to you. Sarah's just used to a different world. She'll come around." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But hope became harder to hold on to when every meeting, every dinner, every small gathering reminded me of how out of place I was. The tipping point came during a small family gathering at Sarah's mansion. I had spent hours preparing a gift for her, a handmade album with memories of us, of simple times we had shared. I had worked on it in secret, staying up late for nights just to make it perfect. When I handed it to her, she opened it, flipping through the pages with a faint smile. "Oh, this is sweet," she said softly. "Sweet. Not thank you. Not, I love this. Just sweet." And then her eyes drifted over the room, lingering on the glittering gifts others had brought. Diamond earrings, designer handbags, luxury watches. I felt my heart tighten, a small ache deep in my chest. I had given her everything I could, my time, my heart, my soul, and it seemed invisible. And yet, in that very moment, I realized something. Her love, if it had ever truly existed, was fragile. It depended on the shimmer of wealth, the elegance of appearance, the applause of society. She hadn't loved me for me. She had loved the idea of me fitting into her world. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I simply watched quietly as the seed of a new resolve grew inside me. One day she would understand. One day she would see that the worth of a man could never be measured in silk, gold, or fancy parties. Days later, a small argument erupted over something trivial. Dinner plans, a comment about furniture, and it escalated only because I had held my silence for so long. "Henry," Sarah said, voice sharp now, "sometimes you just don't get it. You can't live like me. You don't have the right life." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman I had loved, but someone trapped by wealth and appearances. My voice was calm, even as my heart ached. "Maybe I don't, but I know who I am. Sarah, and no suit, no party, no glittering mansion can ever change that. Her eyes flashed, not with love, but with something I had never seen before, maybe even fear. I realized then that my place in her world was never guaranteed, that my heart could be crushed by pride, judgment, and mockery at any moment. But I also realized something else. I wasn't powerless. I could choose patience, silence, and dignity. I could choose to wait for the moment when the truth, the real truth, would reveal itself. And when it did, I would stand strong, not in anger, but in quiet, undeniable power. It wasn't revenge yet. Not loud, not dramatic, just a calm knowing that one day the scales would tip and the world that had belittled me would finally see. And in that knowledge, there was a strange comfort. The day of our engagement ceremony arrived with a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. Sunlight spilled into every corner of Brayden's mansion, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors, illuminating the wealth I had always felt so far from. I straightened my old suit one last time, the same one Sarah had quietly mocked weeks ago. Its fabric was worn, edges slightly frayed, but it had something mine: history, patience, quiet resilience. I arrived at the hall early, breathing in the scent of fresh flowers, polished wood, and money that practically had its own aura. Sarah was inside, radiant as ever, flitting between friends and family, her laughter like delicate glass. I felt the familiar weight settle on my shoulders, not shame this time, but anticipation. Something was about to change. When I stepped into the hall, her smile faltered slightly. She had never seen me like this before, calm, composed, and somehow more solid than she expected. And then it happened. Brayden entered, not in the formal, distant way he usually did, but walking straight toward me. I felt the eyes of every guest on us. Sarah's smile tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Henry Brayden said," his voice smooth but heavy with authority. "May I?" Before I could answer, he adjusted the lapels of his jacket, and I froze. It was the same suit, the exact same fabric, the same cut. My eyes widened. His hand straightened the edges as he smiled gently at me. "It's a good suit," he said, almost casually. "I've had it for years. Wore it to my first major business deal, and it's still standing." A hush fell over the room. Guests exchanged confused glances. Sarah's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. "You," she whispered, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "Yes," Brayden said calmly. "I've always believed that a suit doesn't make the man makes the suit." I felt my chest tighten, a strange warmth of vindication washing over me. The suit I had feared would shame me was now a silent symbol, a bridge connecting me, Henry, the man she had mocked, to the very man whose wealth and power she revered. Sarah's face turned pale. Her mockery, the small glances, the whispered comments, they all seemed suddenly meaningless. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Brayden placed a hand on my shoulder. "Henry, it takes more than appearances to prove one's worth. I've been observing you quietly, and I see integrity, patience, and humility. Traits far rarer than wealth or gold." I swallowed hard. My mind raced, remembering the dinners, the gifts, the moments I had been belittled quietly, all for something I could never control. My lack of status, my worn clothes, and now, in a soft, unspoken way, the scales had begun to tip. Sarah's shoulders slumped, and I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. The same pride she had clung to, the same judgment she had wielded, was no longer safe. She had built her love, perhaps unknowingly, on the wrong foundation. The ceremony proceeded, but the atmosphere had shifted. Guests still smiled, still clinked glasses. But I could feel a quiet power settling around me, not arrogance, not revenge, just dignity. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to make a scene. The truth had spoken for itself, silently but unmistakably. Later, when Sarah finally approached me, her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Henry I." I didn't realize. I looked at her, meeting her gaze without anger. "It's okay," I said gently. "You will see things differently now, and maybe, just maybe, that will help you understand what really matters." She nodded, still quiet, and I could sense the first threads of reflection weaving through her. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't love fully restored. But the first cracks in her pride had begun, and the first realization that wealth alone can't measure a man's worth. That evening, as I walked out into the soft glow of the garden lights, I felt a strange calm. I had endured judgment, subtle humiliation, and quiet mockery, and now the truth had revealed itself without a single harsh word from me. In that moment, I understood something important. Sometimes the strongest power is silence. The quiet dignity of a man who refuses to be diminished speaks louder than any shout, any confrontation, any display of wealth. And in that silence, I had gained something far more valuable than approval. I had gained respect, first from Brayden, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile. The days after the engagement ceremony were quieter than I expected. Not silent exactly, but calmer, as if the world had shifted just enough to let truth settle. Sarah moved differently around me now. Her laughter was softer, her smiles less calculated, her words less sharp. She hadn't apologized outright, and I didn't demand it. I didn't need it. I had learned that dignity often speaks louder than any apology. We began to spend time together differently. She still lived in a world of wealth and grandeur, but slowly, I noticed little changes, small moments where she seemed to see life through my eyes. The way she paused before commenting on my clothes, the way she asked my opinion on small, simple things, the way she laughed at my jokes without that flicker of judgment. Brayden remained a quiet presence, observing from the edges, his approval no longer hidden. Sometimes I caught his gaze, and a small, knowing smile would cross his face. I realized then that he had not just tested me, he had quietly guided the revelation, letting Sarah learn the value of integrity without shame, letting me demonstrate my worth without pride. One evening, Sarah and I walked through the garden after dinner. The air was cool, scented with jasmine and roses, and the soft lights reflected off the fountain like scattered stars. She looked at me, her eyes wide and a little vulnerable. "Henry," she said softly, "I think I've been blind. I focused so much on appearances, on wealth, on how things looked, that I didn't see you. Not really. I didn't see you." I felt a mixture of relief and quiet sorrow. Relief that she was beginning to understand, sorrow for the months lost to pride and misunderstanding. I reached out and took her hand gently. "It's okay, Sarah," I whispered. "We all learn at our own pace. What matters is that we see each other now. That's what counts." And for the first time, I felt a genuine warmth from her, unfiltered, unguarded. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't the easy, idealized love I had once imagined, but it was real, and it was enough. In the weeks that followed, our engagement moved forward, but the focus shifted from grandeur to connection. Sarah began to understand that my world, though modest, had its own richness of love, loyalty, and sincerity. She laughed more freely at home, cooked with me, and even teased me gently about my old suit, but without cruelty. There was a softness in her eyes, a recognition that true value isn't counted in dollars. Brayden remained a steady, silent guide throughout it all. He never boasted, never reminded me of his power. Instead, he demonstrated it in the quietest way possible by trusting me, by letting my character shine, by allowing the truth to unfold naturally. Evan noticed the change too. One afternoon, as we sat in the small park near my old apartment, he grinned and said, "Looks like you finally leveled the playing field." Henry, chuckled, but inside I knew it wasn't about leveling anything. It was about recognition. Quiet, patient, undeniable recognition of who I was. Sarah and I had our first real conversation about love, not status or wealth, but love in its simplest form. She admitted her mistakes, not as excuses, but as reflections. And I forgave silently, not because she deserved it, but because my heart had grown beyond the need for resentment. The quiet revenge I had imagined, the satisfaction of seeing her humbled, was nothing compared to the peace I felt in dignity, in knowing that I had not compromised my values. The suit she had mocked, it had been a symbol all along. A reminder that patience, humility, and integrity outlast fashion, wealth, and pride. By the time the wedding invitations went out, the atmosphere was different. The world she had once idolized now seemed less important than the world we were building together, a world of mutual respect, understanding, and genuine love. And I realized that the true power of wealth is not in money, nor in status, nor in luxury. The true power is in character, in patience, and in the quiet strength to endure and remain true to oneself. Years later, I still think about that engagement day, the way sunlight had streamed through the hall, the way Sarah's eyes had flickered with judgment, and the quiet weight of my old suit. It seems like a lifetime ago, yet the lessons remain as vivid as ever. Sarah and I have grown together since then, slowly, gently. She has learned to look beyond appearances, to value the man beside her over the world around her. I have learned that patience and dignity are stronger than pride, that silence can carry more weight than words, and that true power lies not in wealth but in character. Brayden, in his quiet way, taught us both a lesson that no one else could. He never boasted, never flaunted, never forced understanding. He simply allowed the truth to reveal itself, letting integrity shine through in its own time. And through that, I realized that respect earned quietly is far more lasting than fear or admiration gained loudly. I don't resent the moments of humiliation, the subtle mockery, the judgments Sarah once carried. They were part of the journey that brought us here to a place of understanding, love, and genuine connection. In fact, I am grateful for them because they shaped my patience, strengthened my resolve, and revealed the quiet power I had always possessed. Sometimes I catch Sarah looking at me, not with judgment, but with appreciation, admiration, and slowly love that is steady and enduring. She may never fully understand the weight of her early pride, but she feels the truth now, that love is measured not in wealth, clothes, or status, but in honesty, kindness, and the courage to remain true to oneself. And the old suit, it hangs in my closet still, worn but steady, a symbol of endurance, of humility, and of a truth that no amount of silk or gold can ever outweigh. In the end, wealth can't measure the worth of love. It cannot shape character, cannot buy integrity, and cannot replace the quiet dignity of a man who remains himself in the face of mockery and judgment. True worth is revealed in patience, in resilience, and in the small, silent victories of the heart. And, as I sit quietly, thinking back on it all, I smile, because the man I am, the life we have built, and the love we now share are richer than any mansion, any suit, or any fortune. They are real, enduring, and mine, and that is more than enough.